there was literally non-human bodies falling onto New Mexico because they were being launched in White Sands Missile Range. And this one's name is Mike. He survived. Luckily, he ended up and lived in a zoo until the mid-60s. Welcome to UFO Seekers. I'm Tim Doyle, and today we're taking a deep dive into the 1947 Roswell UFO crash. Now, of course, we already warned everybody that we were going to be revisiting this supposed crash and also apologizing for what we're going to say because we know that it's not really politically correct to mention anything except aliens when it comes to this incident. Now, of course, I've traveled to the crash site location, been on the ranch myself, and so it's not like talking about this incident just comes from nowhere. There is some personal work experience, and of course, I've spent over 6 years in the field skywatching for UFO activity and talking to thousands of witnesses. So a lot of what I tell people actually comes from real world work experience. We're going to take a deep dive into this Roswell crash incident. And the first thing is the Roswell crash didn't even happen in Roswell. And you can see on our community tab on YouTube where we gave a poll out asking people where the Roswell crash happened. And literally the majority of people said the wrong place. They said Roswell. Roswell crash actually happened in Corona, New Mexico, which is northwest, about 70 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico. All right, so the crash didn't even happen in Roswell. Roswell is the city that has taken advantage of the marketing and advertising around this incident. And there goes my career and my reputation, like a V2 rocket, crashing down in flames. So what was really going on? Was there more than cows and ranch hands like W.W. Braswell who found the pieces of debris that we... Between February 4th and 11th, 1945, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met in the Russian town of Crimea to discuss the fate of post-war Germany, right? Because Germany had fallen, the World War had ended, World War II. The German rocket engineers knew nothing of the Allies' post-war plans for their country, but had started planning for their own post-war future, right? And we're talking about the German engineers who had invented rockets. In January, Wernher von Braun had begun his team's evacuation from their northern research and testing facility with rail cars, trucks, and cars filled with hardware and documentation relating to the V-2 missile. This convoy amounted to tons of materials sufficiently sensitive that in April, von Braun had 2 of his most trusted men hide everything in an abandoned mine. Finally hiding at Haus Ingeberg, von Braun and a core group of engineers were still hiding in this mountain resort when Hitler committed suicide on April 30th. 2 days later, his brother Magnus set out, found, and surrendered to American troops who happened to be stationed just miles from Ingeborg. The timing of von Braun's movements was fortuitous. On May 5th, the Russian army arrived at and took possession of the cleaned out facilities at the testing facilities where they had been and where all the information and parts, stuff like that. By the end of the month, the rocket engineers had surrendered their hidden documents and hardware to the Americans, moving the last crates out of the abandoned mine just hours before British troops occupied the area. By fall, the first engineers and their V2 materials were on their way to America. The recovered V2 parts, documents, and engineers were shipped via the U.S. Army to the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, a continental launch site for America's nascent missile program that had been established in 1944. Men and materials were absorbed into Project Hermes, a program developed to give America's military experience handling large missiles, data on ballistics, and to give scientists the means to explore the upper atmosphere. At the time, the V-2 was the only rocket that could carry a substantial science payload off the planet. Recovered V2 hardware arrived at White Sands in hundreds of train cars that took 20 days to unload, and the pieces were in various states of disrepair. Some systems were so badly damaged they were unusable. As the American V2 program progressed, there were offshoots and modifications made to meet certain research goals. Among these offshoots were the Blossom Project, a series of V2s launched by the Air Force and the Cambridge Research Laboratories with biological payloads to yield data on how upper atmosphere and space flight might affect future human passengers. 4 of these Blossom V2s carried rhesus monkeys, all named Albert, who were ultimately sacrificed in the name of science. The V2 Blossom had a specially constructed warhead and fuselages longer than the standard V2 by about 65 inches. The added length adversely affected the missile's flight. Though of the 7 Blossom V2s, 4 were affected by the same failure, tail explosions early in the flight. Unfortunately, for the Alberts, there were monkeys on board some of these flights. The first V2 Blossom to carry a monkey was launched on June 11th, 1948. I have an authentic picture here of one of these monkeys. And I want you to meet Mike. This is Mike. We can't be like hoaxing UFO celebrities and say that the military tells us things right when they happen, okay? So everything that I see the military do, I expect they've been doing it for about 2 years. And I know for a fact the military had been testing supersonic items in 1947, including things like the V2 rocket, the missile, the rocket with biological payloads, such as Mike. But Mike here launched in 52. And Mike is literally part of 2 monkeys that went on this trip and survived. They were the first ones. There was one monkey who survived, but they didn't recover him alive. He baked in the sun and passed away. Okay. There's a lot of tragic and terrible stories associated with this story. Mike flew with Patricia. So there was Mike and Patricia. And they flew on this rocket launch called an Aerobee. Here's an Aerobee rocket. And this is an actual launch here taking place in 1949. So your date, 49, okay? And it says here, New Mexico, an Air Force Aerobee upper atmosphere research rocket soars skyward from its launching tower. Here, December 2nd, attaining an altitude of 60 miles above the Earth, one of 60 Aerobee rockets to be launched in a 2-year program of atmospheric research. This particular rocket, 20 feet long, slightly over 1 foot in diameter, with 3 fins to provide stability. I'm telling you, the military does things and they don't tell us. And I believe they were already launching the monkeys. Now, if we read about the first monkey launches that they tell us about, they were occurring in 1948. Now, here we have 2 separate maps. This one is showing you the position of Corona, New Mexico, in relations to White Sands. Up here, we have Corona. Here is White Sands Missile Range, and this is the military perimeter of this whole area, because White Sands is kind of like in this lower portion here. There's Corona, New Mexico, about 100, 120 miles away. Here's Roswell, and you can see that Roswell is actually to the east. If you were here at White Sands launching a rocket or missile, which way are you going to launch it? Are you going to launch it this way over the city and then over to Roswell? Or are you going to launch it north and land it somewhere in the facility? And the reason I'm saying that is because when we look at Corona, which is north, now you can picture the rocket taking off, a rocket, and accidentally landing here. Here's 1949, a picture. This is an authentic picture. Again, this isn't fake, this is real. This is from 1949, and what you're looking at is the first Air Force air-to-air guided missile. And this is from 1949 in New Mexico. And let's read this. The Ryan Firebird, first Air Force air-to-air guided missile is a rocket-propelled fragmentation shell which homes in on its target by means of a radar navigational system. It is one of the most compact and intelligent high-speed flying weapons ever devised. Actual firing tests have recently been completed in New Mexico. The Firebird missile is launched by a mother fighter plane in the direction of enemy aircraft, which the fighter tracks by means of radar. It permits the aircraft carrying the missiles to destroy enemy planes at night or in inclement weather when visual sight is impossible. The intelligence of the Firebird is its complicated radar, navigational, and electronic system. Initial propulsion force is supplied by a booster section of the rocket, which separates from the missile when expended. Flight rockets supply the force necessary for the remainder of the missile's powered flight. Read about Mike here, because we got the newspaper article snippet here. It says survivor, Airmen Marshall V. Ross and Eric Gnapp observed one of the monkeys which survived rocket trip 38 miles into upper atmosphere in test at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. Monkey is in laboratory back in same rocket in which he made experimental flight. On May 22nd, 1952, the U.S. Air Force launched another spaceflight, but this time with the purpose of examining the potential biophysical impact of spaceflight to humans. To make this possible, two Philippine monkeys, Patricia and Michael, were chosen to be enclosed in the nose section of a small Aerobee rocket. Both Patricia and Mike were given anesthesia to keep them calm during the flight. They were also given a supply of oxygen through face masks. Before they were secured into the nose cone, the monkeys were also strapped into rubber coaches and placed in two different positions. This was done to help scientists examine more closely the variations of rocket flight acceleration. The Aerobee rocket reached a height of 36 miles at a speed of 2,000 miles per hour, making Patricia and Mike the first primates to ever reach such altitude. As they flew above, the passengers showed biophysical responses to acceleration, deceleration, and weightlessness, a result that became valuable to space scientists. All animals survived this space flight thanks to a parachute that assisted the capsule to a soft landing. And trust me, I read about the other monkeys. Okay, there's times where the parachutes didn't work and you wonder why non-human dead bodies were falling out of the sky in New Mexico. The Philippine monkeys both retired at the National Zoological Park in Washington, D.C. Patricia died 2 years later, while Mike in 1967, both due to natural causes. Although the Philippine monkeys never reached the outer space, their achievement has been considered crucial for the American space flight. Their survival and the subsequent physiological data taken from the experiment proved that none of the animals were hurt during the space flight. Those two monkeys, Patricia and Mike. But the problem is when you're launching animals and doing experiments on animals, they don't really know what's going on, and so you can't really get their permission. People were outraged when they found out about this going on, and they did find out about this going on. Look, they were running this in the newspaper. This is why no one thought anything about the Roswell incident back then. And if we talk about it now, the crash at Corona, we can't not talk about the monkeys that were falling out of the sky. And lots of people at the time got upset and actually started mailing the military saying they would volunteer to be the experiment and save the animals, leave the animals alone, and please send us up. We'll volunteer to be a part of these experiments. Because I know it's kind of freaky, and it's probably the last thing you thought we were going to talk about. But the truth matters, and that's what we're here to cover. So when people ask you, how could non-human bodies be found out on a ranch, out in Corona? First off, UFO seekers showed me a picture of an Aerobee rocket launching in '49. We read history about the V-2 rockets, which the initial monkeys were being launched in. The V-2 rockets, which we took from Germany after World War II, started firing at White Sands Missile Range in 1946. And from the military's admissions, which we don't know all of, there was lots of dirty stuff going on back then. They only admit to sending the monkeys up as early as 48. So in 49, they went to a smaller rocket, the Aerobee, and were launching their biological payloads over New Mexico, such as monkeys. And then you're going to tell the person, look, Roswell's to the east, Corona's to the north. They were launching this stuff to the north, and one overshot its landing area. So if they found non-human dead bodies anywhere around here, we could see the Arrow B rocket going up, or a V2 rocket going up. Oh, it's going off because they were already testing these types of technologies. And we accidentally ended up over here. Okay, it's sad. I wish it was all about aliens all the time, right? But we got to keep it real, right, Neil? We got to keep it real, Neil. And do it for Mike. I didn't know about Mike. When I went to Roswell, no one taught me about Mike. Luckily, Mike got to live till 1967 in a zoo, Washington, D.C., and was one of the lucky ones and survived. So, Mike, thank you for your service, buddy. True military hero. We love Mike. Mike's passed on, and I know he's in heaven. Thanks for your service, buddy. Because I know we wouldn't be in space if it wasn't for animals like you who didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice. Thanks, Mike.